I'm Christina Bossinakis.
And I'm Gabby Gaudet, and you're listening to the TDN's Let's Talk. Welcome back for the latest edition of Let's Talk, and today we will be talking to vets, Christina, and one of them is Dr. Bill Hawk. He is a track practitioner. He practices at both in Kentucky and also at Oaklawn.
And very well known on the East Coast, Dr. Patty Hogan, an equine surgeon and specializing in orthopedics. She's done tremendous work, including with Smarty Jones. Famously, she really got him on track as a young horse. And we also have Dr. Dionne Benson, the Chief Veterinary Officer at the Stronach Group.
I hope you enjoy the latest edition of Let's Talk. Thank you all for joining us here this afternoon. We'll just get right into it. Obviously, each of you have different backgrounds and are currently kind of do very different things, whether it be practicing at the track, holding a role as in the regulatory area, and obviously surgeon as well. So all three of you kind of fill these different spots in terms of the broad spectrum of vets. And I just want to know, first and foremost, kind of what are some of the challenges that you guys face currently? And anybody can pick this up.
Well, how about age before beauty, Bill?
All right, fair enough. I'll start out a little bit. One of the biggest problems I have is finding young veterinarians that want to come into practice with us. We have demands as far as the hours that we have to work, as far as time off, benefits. We certainly have problems with regulatory considerations. There's a lot of paperwork now that we have to comply with. There's a lot of young veterinarians that are scared to death about coming in equine medicine, particularly at the racetrack. And if they make a mistake, and not something that's egregious, but they make a mistake that can be sanctioned pretty harshly, and they've got student loans and they've got a lot of things to have to satisfy, including making a living, which may be, and I'm talking about as simply as they walk in a stall, the wrong stall, treat the wrong horse. And that can create a big problem. And that type of scenario really scares them to death. But the biggest thing is the hours. We can't find people who want to work the long hours that a racetrack practitioner is asked to work. And it creates a problem for us older folks, if you will. And many of us are staying on a little bit longer than we'd like to, but we feel a commitment to our clients and certainly to our horses to keep going. And we do have a real hard problem finding young veterinarians coming to the practice of equine medicine and racetrack veterinary medicine. So, we'd like to see that change. We don't see a real bright future for that. Patty, do you see any young people that want to come to the racetrack, or most of them want to go into a surgical practice? Or what are you seeing?
It's all over actually in equine that there's a real shortage of people interested in equine. I mean, just even the internship and residency programs are really suffering for a lack of interest or lack of applications, really. Whereas when I was applying for internships and residencies, it was so difficult to get one because there was just so many applicants. Whereas now there's internships that are left wanting to fill. So I don't see it so much myself personally because I'm in a solo practice with another associate surgeon, but we hear it from all of our referring veterinarians that they're older and they have a real hard time finding younger people to fill in the gaps and kind of train on. Racetrack practice is just it's a different environment. You have to really have a love for it and a real love for the sport and an understanding of the sport. And that's been a difficult challenge for our referring veterinarians like you.
Sure.
For me, myself, the biggest pressures I run into really has to do with the value of the horses that I deal with. That's one thing. And also the fact that most of my owners are absentee owners. I'm dealing a lot of times with a trainer, communicating with the trainer or the veterinarian. And so I have to be very careful that everyone is in the loop. And especially now, there's a lot of partnerships that are huge. We do some work for my racehorse, for instance. They have about 3,500 owners on a horse, and I actually will get calls, from people that own a very small percentage. They're real good as an entity to try to decrease that, but there's a real communication challenge sometimes that everyone knows what's happening with the horses, what the expectations are, what the outcome is going to be. So that's, for me, the pressure of the value of the horses that we deal with.
From my perspective, I mean, we certainly have a lot of responsibility in the roles, and the vets that work for us, they have a lot of responsibility to try to really make hard choices with very little information. We get to see the horses for a few minutes or less, and we're trying to make decisions on whether this horse should race, whether it should wait and go another day, whether it needs diagnostics, and we don't have a lot of the background information on what's been done with the horse. So that makes it a little challenging. I mean, as far as getting people in, we certainly see that traditionally racetrack regulatory practice has been seen as a retirement role. And I think honestly that we are trying to move away from that and get younger people involved earlier. So I fight the stereotype of people who feel like, they're going to miss something by not being in the private practice, injecting joints and treating colics. Whereas, I think that there can be a very rewarding practice in regulatory medicine, and you're going to see probably more lameness cases than anyone will in a week, than any private practitioner will in a week, just because you're looking at every horse, on the track. And so it's really a challenging role. But the one thing we do have going for us certainly is we have a little bit better hours than the private practitioners do. And I can always promise my vets that they'll never have to come in at 2 a.m. for a colic.
So is it that are there not a lot of students coming out of veterinary schools to come into equine veterinary medicine? Or is it that these students that are coming out of the veterinary schools are going into other disciplines, like maybe they're going into small animal practice, or, they're not coming in? Because it seems like there's quite a few schools and that there are a lot of students, but then it seems to be a shortage. So I'm just wondering, what's the connection? Like, where are they just not coming to equine?
Definitely not. There's definitely a real shortage of young people interested in agricultural fields. I mean, we see it, yes, in equine, but the people that are in large animal, bovine, avian, all the other agricultural aspects are really hurting for people. I mean, look at the kids today. How many of them grow up on a farm? Not that many anymore, so they just don't really have the exposure, just not the outreach that used to be when I was growing up. So I think there's definitely a lack of overall kids that are interested in an agricultural based career.
Is it a money issue?
I wouldn't say that necessarily. I mean, there's trade-offs, like Bill was saying about the hours and how long it takes you to establish yourself. I mean, certainly that's an aspect, but you have to have a real love for horses to be a equine vet. I mean, it's not something you just say, I'm going to go to work and be an accountant. I'll go ahead and be an equine vet. It's something that you really have a passion for.
Well, I don't think many people necessarily understand the hours that go into it from the outside looking in. So, I mean, Dr. Hawk, can you kind of speak to that? And what are the hours? Anyone can answer this question, but what are the hours? How often does your phone go off? How often do you have to be at the barn? How often are you on? Or I guess the better question is, how often are you off?
Not often. The truth is, it depends on whether we've got day racing or night racing. And it has to do with when I'm at Churchill Downs working, usually 5 out of 7 mornings per week, I show up at 4:00 in the morning. And then I'll usually work until about noon. I take a couple of hours off and generally are doing paperwork. Then I come back around 3:00 and I'll work until about 5:30, 6:00. And that's if I have no emergencies after that. And if it's not a race day, that's a dark day where there's no racing. If it's a racing day with afternoon racing, I'll have that work schedule in the morning until noonish. And then I usually take about an hour off for lunch. I'm back at 1:00 for that afternoon's racing card, and I'll stay there until usually the last race, because fortunately, I'm blessed with a good practice. And Steve Asmussen's probably my biggest client, so he's got many, many horses throughout the day's card, and we scope everything. And after the last race, win, lose, or draw, I'm still scoping that horse some 30 to 45 minutes after he returns to the barn, whether he's at the test barn or whether he's come straight back. So that's, as you can see, quite a bit. Now, if it's a night racing card, which we occasionally have at Churchill, I'm usually there till midnight and then back again at 4:00 in the morning. Now, I'm kind of a workaholic, and it's not necessary to do what I do, but that's what I do because my clients kind of demand it, and they panic if I'm not around. That's a relationship. Patty, I got the same way with you. When you were on vacation, I couldn't send my cases over to you, and I'd have to send them somebody else there when I was at Delaware for all those years. But it's a long, grinding day for an equine veterinarian. And even when you promise a lot less hours for a younger person and you try to have quality of life issues, they still are probably still looking at about a 60-hour work week.
I think the other thing we struggle with is we are primarily a weekend business. I mean, at the racetrack, I was talking to a vet who's interested in joining our practice or one of our teams this weekend. And I said, the upsides are I can actually give the vets quality of life because we start at 4:45 in the morning on a dark day, we're done by 11. If we start race day, we'll start at 4:45 in the morning and we're done by 6. So there can be long days, but there can be days off, there can be short days, but I can never promise them that they'll have regular weekends off. And that is challenging, especially if you've got young vets with families and they want to spend time with them. And you're basically telling them you're never going to be off the same time your kids are around. So.
Yeah, that's true in our area of veterinary medicine as well. I'm going to digress for just a moment I read something not too long ago that the AVMA published, and they said that about 1% of all veterinary students graduating go into equine medicine or surgery. And of that 1%, half of those are gone within 5 years. So I don't know how many graduate every year from veterinary school. You guys have an idea, maybe 2,000 or something like that? And say the number was 2,000. I don't know.
That's probably
taking a shot here. Is that close, Dionne?
Yeah, I would say that's about right. I'm trying to think because there's probably 24 vet schools and 100 students apiece average. So maybe 2,500.
There's going to be some attrition, maybe, but say there's 20 to 25 per year interested in equine medicine, and you're losing half of those within 5 years, then you can see where the squeeze comes in, and that's problematical for us, and the pool isn't there. Now, I know in my practice, I'm looking for somebody now, and I'm looking to pay considerably more than what they could make if they went into small animal medicine, or considerably more than a lot of practices. I'm not getting a lot of response. I really am not, and it's very frustrating. And I reached out to Larry Bramlage about 3 weeks ago, and I said, Larry, have you got any interns finishing that might be interested in coming to race practice? And I refer a lot to Larry in Kentucky when I'm there. I'm also at Oaklawn during the winter months. But he said, Bill, he had nobody in mind. They can't fill all the spots they can for moving on in their own business and with their interns. They're not filling all their intern spots at Root and Riddle. This is kind of that's the place to be, I would suppose, the top of the food chain. But they can't fill all those. I was just stunned with what Larry had to say. So that's a big problem facing us at the racetrack. I'm going to digress another minute. It's a good time for me to say this to Dionne. Many of us, for many years as racetrack practitioners, have been on board more than you think with regulatory veterinarians about what's best for the horse. And we sometimes feel the regulatory people are on one side of the fence and the racetrack guys or girls are on the other side of the fence, and that shouldn't be that way. And I would hope, and I know in Kentucky and Oaklawn both, with Dr. Lokank here at Oaklawn and with Nick Smith in Kentucky, I share a lot of radiographs and a lot of diagnostics and a lot of information, because you said that you didn't often get a lot of background information, but I share that in my practice so that we can make a good decision about that horse. Nobody wants the breakdowns. Nobody wants a jock to get injured. Nobody wants the public perception that we're suffering right now that we've got to overcome. So, I would like to see the regulatory and the racetrack folks have a little bit better rapport. And it can be done, and it must be done. I realize there's some strained relationships at various places, but for the most part, just like you are, we're about the horse. We have economic considerations from owners putting pressure on us, from trainers and everything else. But when you get a little more gray in your hair and when you get a little more experience, it's easy to look at it and say, no, we're not going to do that. That's not the path we're going to take. And I understand some younger people have problems with that kind of pressure, but I'd like to see you guys reach out, whether it's one-on-one or in a group setting or whatever, to know that more than you think, most racetrack veterinarians see things closer to what you see things than what you might think. So I'm just glad I had the opportunity to state that to you.
Yeah, I think that you would be surprised, because I would say that probably 85 to 90% of our relationships with the vets are very good. We have regular meetings with them. We have one-on-ones. They will come to us and say, I'm having a hard time getting this vet to, or this trainer or this owner to do this. It really needs to be done. So they will come to us and say, can you help me? And then we just happen to stop by and say, I don't like the way this looks, because we as a company have such a presence at our tracks with vets. It's not unusual for us to stop by a trainer's barn on a regular basis and say, hey, I saw this horse out in the track. I want to see him jog, and no, this horse can't come to the track until it's had X, Y, or Z done. Never mentioning that the vet had asked us to do this. And we do this even when the vet doesn't ask us. And so we do have a lot of those great relationships. Where we suffer is that 5 to 10% of the vets who have, I think there are some private vets who have the opinion that their job is to get that horse to the race, and their job is to make that horse win, as opposed to, make sure the horse is ready to race and then help it race. So in the cases where we have these good relationships, it works really well. Where we suffer is where we can't call that vet, or if we do call that vet, we feel like we won't get a straight answer. And I don't think it's the majority, but just like I'm sure you have regulators that you have that won't work with you and are very difficult, we have private vets that we work with that are very difficult. And I think that's just, you have to always worry about the least common denominator, whichever way it goes.
Do you have an idea how we could expand that to be better?
I mean, I think there has to be an inherent trust, and I'm not sure how you build that except for over time. I mean, when I started in in California, and some of the kind of more unique policies that we implemented and kind of we started from a very difficult place and a very tough and distrustful place, and it changed very quickly. But getting that other places, we had to have that almost crisis in racing to get that. And I'm not sure how you manufacture that kind of urgency without a crisis.
We will continue this episode of Let's Talk in just a moment, but first we want to say a special thanks to our sponsor in First Racing. We're on the heels of a very big weekend for First Racing, both at Santa Anita and Gulfstream Park. Successful March 5th weekend, Christina.
You know, we've become accustomed to seeing these cross country bonanzas, really, of racing, and you know, we're going to see it again with the Florida Derby. We're going to see it with the Santa Anita Derby. Obviously, both those days, those cards are going to be loaded with graded stakes action. But you know, Gabby, really, it's getting exciting because we're seeing the Triple Crown develop. We're starting to see some superstars emerge, or potential superstars emerge. And really, if we look back in history, Florida has been, and California, Santa Anita, they've been two of the places where a lot of the main Triple Crown contenders go through. So it's really exciting racing.
Things are heating up from coast to coast. We'll take a moment here to get another word from our sponsors at First Racing. And thank you again to our sponsor at First Racing. Thank you to our additional sponsor in Healthnetics as well. So today, all guests will receive a premium CBD gift set from Healthnetics for everyday aches and pains and an overall sense of calm. Try Healthnetics CBD. All Healthnetics products are all natural, made in the USA, and are THC free. Healthnetics products come with a 100% money-back guarantee as well. So go to healthnetics.com and use promo code TDN to get 25% off. Once again, thank you to our sponsors. We rejoin today's podcast.
We were just talking a second ago about relationships, and you just made me think of something because that kind of made me laugh. Patty, I have a colleague of mine who's also, I like to think, who's a friend of mine, Aaron Yagoda, and I spoke to him the other day, who I know you know well, and I spoke to him the other day, and I said, you know, Aaron, so what do you call, I don't know, what do I call Dr. Hogan? Do I call her Dr. Hogan? Do I call her Patty? Do I call her and he goes, well, I call her Allstate. And I'm like, Allstate? Why do you call her Allstate? And he said, because you're in good hands, right? So apparently this is what he calls you. And it made me think of something, which was the relationships. And again, it's a little bit pivoting off of just what Bill and Dionne were talking about, the relationships between the trainers and between, the different levels of with the trainers and the vets, and also the regulatory side. But it's also those relationships are very important also between the clients and the vets as well. And that trust that you build with each other. Tell me how important it is to really have that kind of relationship with your clients, that you can develop that kind of trust where they really put faith in you.
To me, it's a real gift. It takes a long time to get, but it gives you such a level of confidence when you evaluate one of their horses that they're going to take your advice. I mean, it's a totally different game when you have to convince someone that what you're telling them is the right thing for the horse. Whereas when you have somebody that knows you, they expect whatever you're going to say to them, they're going to take it. You're both on the same page. It's a real gift. It makes my job so much easier, and I'm so happy that a lot of my clients are really long-term clients. I mean, one of my first clients was Todd Pletcher when he was starting out, and I remember when he had a barn of 9 horses. And we've just gotten to know each other over the years. So now when he calls with a case, I know what his expectations are, and he's extremely easy to work with because he's going to do what I think is the best thing to do once they get to know what your judgment level is. So it's a huge comfort. You're not having to second guess what your diagnostics are or what your recommendations are. It's really nice. And I think in the end, the horse ends up winning because the right things are done and you're not doing things just to appease somebody. You're doing things because it's the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Bill, you also have had, obviously you've been practicing, I think over 40 years. So you've had probably some really long standing clients as well. Tell me a little bit about that relationship as well and how that's developed over time, and if it's changed and if it puts pressure on you in a way because they have such faith in you.
Well, for me, the number one thing is to give them information so that they can make an informed consent and a well-informed consent. So when you evaluate a horse, first thing you have to remember, those of us at the racetrack are kind of the first line, kind of like the family practitioner. And it's our job to know a little bit about a lot of things, but know where to go, like to someone like world-class surgeons like Patty or to Larry Bramlage or others. But we have to have the ability to look at things, recognize problems, and know where to go when they're out of our realm of either diagnostics or treatment capabilities. So when you analyze cases, you look at it, you tell them what you believe to be there, and if you don't know, you're honest with them and say, I don't know, but here's what we're going to do to find out. And people respect you for that. If you don't know, tell them, I don't know. But I know Dr. Hogan can figure it out, or Dr. Bramlage can figure it out, or we've got to do a bone scan, or we've got to do this, that, or the other thing. Then it's your job then to say, listen, I don't know, but this is the direction I believe we need to go in, and that's what I think you should do. When they see you recommend and refer, and you're not getting into their pocket, but you're shifting it so you're not going to benefit financially, they see you referring to somebody else, they all of a sudden say, hey, this guy's got our horses and our best interest in mind and not necessarily his pocketbook. And I think as veterinarians, we oftentimes get accused of that too often. We're just there for the money. Well, I can promise you, it's a business, and we're there to make a living and to make money. I'm not going to get away from that. But we have to know what's best for the horse. And sometimes we'll give them a couple of different options and say, this is what you can do. You can do A, B, or C. What would you like to do? Now, most of the times I'm dealing with a trainer who has kind of the authorized agent is making the decision for the owner, and we do things accordingly. But I always offer to my trainers my availability to talk directly to the owners if they so choose, with their blessing. And if that's the case, then I'll speak to the owner and I'll lay it out for them as well. And we oftentimes get better compliance if we really believe something needs to be done. If I think a horse is surgical and a guy is dragging his feet about it, I might say to the trainer, listen, I don't think this guy completely understands the gravity of the situation. And this is what we need to do. And so we'll phone them up and say, hey, this is what I think we need to do. Here's what can happen. If you don't do it percentage-wise, horses can make you look pretty stupid sometimes because they overcome a lot of things that we don't think they can, and then sometimes certain things bother them that we don't think are bothering them as much as might bother another horse. But I work real hard to make sure that they're informed. That's the most important thing, is you make sure people are in the loop, you keep them informed, and that develops their trust. And I'm blessed that I have I've got some clients that I've worked for since I first started out. And I've certainly, we've been, around different places and developed a lot of great relationships, over time. So that's the way I've done it, mostly by being honest with people and telling them what I believe and then showing them the right direction if necessary.
I can't underscore what Bill said about being honest. A lot of times I'll say, each surgery is not a good option for you here. And that has served me well over the years because it's, people know that you actually do have their interest at heart and you're not just there to do the surgery. It's not going to give them a good outcome. So being honest is definitely cemented those relationships.
It seems like integrity is always a very important thing that you want to have in terms, especially in this industry. But Dr. Hawk, you mentioned something about, the relationships with your clients, and sometimes those newer clients, they overall, I guess my question is, recently, it seems like vets, there are, just like I would compare it to what we have been dealing with police officers, right? Like one police officer does something really bad, it's in the media, and the public wants to paint all police officers with one brushstroke as being bad. And I wonder if you feel that pressure as being vets within the industry. Do you feel that pressure at all to make sure, you don't get into this profession without being absolutely in love with animals and the love of the racehorse, but do you at the end of the day kind of feel that pressure and that public perception lately?
Yes, very much so. We practice anymore with a lot of those pressures in mind. And number one is we don't want anything bad to happen to the horse or to the rider. That's, not only is it bad for those two entities, but it's bad for the perception of the business and reflects poorly on the veterinarians. But one thing we do, a lot of us older guys, and myself, and there was a guy named Milton McClure, he and I used to coach up a lot of young veterinarians. If we thought they were kind of stepping over the line a little bit or pushing the line a little bit, we'd get them off to the side and say, hey, not only are you affecting yourself, but you're affecting the rest of us, and we don't really like that. We had a particular situation at Oakland a few years ago that we thought a veterinarian was kind of doing some things we didn't like, and we coached him up a little bit. And we said, listen, you're going to cause not only yourself a lot of problem, but we're not going to be able to do these procedures. They're going to take them away from us. And he kind of was adamant about his practice. He was going to do it his way. As kind of as Dionne was referring to, that kind of the 5 or 10%. And we lost the ability to do shock waving at Oakland Park for 30 days. We can't even have a machine on the grounds. And I find it to be a very therapeutic modality if done the right way and done under the right supervision, and we can't do it. And so we've lost that ability to be able to properly and therapeutically treat a horse that certainly needs it. So, we feel the pressure to the point where we call out our colleagues. Believe me, we'll call them out, and we try to do it in a behind the scenes way. But I'll be honest with you, there's sometimes you got to drop a dime on a guy, and just say to somebody like Dionne and say, hey, I want to take another look at this, and just kind of let them know that we recognize as practitioners that it's going to reflect poorly on all of us, and maybe they could take a look at things. And I think she knows what I'm talking about, and I'm not trying to say, we're a jailhouse rat or something like that, but it bothers all of us who are trying to do it right.
Do you feel that pressure to just on the regulatory side? Do you feel the responsibility, I guess is the better word?
So, I think that when a veterinarian comes to us with some concern, we absolutely have to take it seriously. And depending on where we are, if it happens at Santa Anita, the wonderful thing we have there is cameras everywhere. And we can just go back and look at the cameras and, look at every barn, you can see almost in every stall. So yeah, there is a lot of ability to kind of go through and say, hey, this is what we're seeing. This is our concern. And, the one thing that Bill is absolutely right about is even if I do everything right, if Bill does everything right, if Patty does everything right, we are still going to have an issue if there are people in our industry, racetracks in our industry, veterinarians, trainers in our industry that aren't doing the right things, because they are going to become the poster children for the people who don't want racing anymore. We are vulnerable to the worst people in our industry. And that's true of every industry. I mean, I've been a lawyer. Bad lawyers make for really great jokes, but really bad precedent, bad cases. The same thing happens here. It's just, we have this responsibility to make sure that racing is as fair and honest, and keeping the horse at the center and putting it first is the way, in my opinion, to do that. But yeah, we absolutely, when we're regulating anything, we have any complaints, any concerns that come to us, we take extremely seriously. And we're not, at least I can speak for the tracks that I work with, we're not afraid to call people in and call them out a little bit if we think that they've done something that's inappropriate.
I was going to pivot a little bit off of that because I think that's really interesting. In my younger days, I was actually a science major, and I worked at a veterinary hospital, an emergency hospital for small animals, for about 7 or 8 years. So I saw a lot. And I know it's not horses, but there's the same kind of dynamics happening with the client relations and the doctors and just the whole thing. And one thing that I remember was there were times when, you had most of the clients would come in, they love their animals, they'll do anything for them. They were great. And then you'd get sometimes these really questionable cases that would come in that really are towing the line of, some of them actually, they weren't even towing the line. They were just, it was negligence. It was people who were mistreating animals. I saw like just heinous things. And this was just in a regular practice that I saw day to day. As a veterinarian, what is that responsibility that do you feel in terms of this animal? So you come in and you see a situation where you're thinking, and again, as we're saying, this is a very small percentage of what's going on in the bigger picture, as we know. But what is the responsibility of the veterinarian? Is there a responsibility personally? And is there like of a greater good kind of responsibility? And anybody can take this one.
I mean, I think we try to take responsibility for those horses. I mean, I can give you for example, we had a horse that had a puncture wound that was on the track, and the trainer has no money, and they were treating it conservatively, and it was getting worse. And so finally we kind of told the trainer, this horse needs to be referred. And if you're not willing to refer it, it can't stay here, but we will make sure it gets into an adoption program, and they will send it to, the surgery to get the surgery that it needs, because it basically needed to have the whole tendon sheath cleaned out at that point. And so I think that is one thing that we can do especially with the aftercare programs, and having the funding to do some of those surgeries and some of those more aggressive procedures. And we have done that as an organization to make sure that these horses, that they can be a perfectly great riding horse once you get the treatment it needs, gets the treatment it needs, that the person who has it right now, even if they want to do the right thing by the horse, they can't afford to do the right thing by the horse. So it's not always negligence. Sometimes it's just they're in a really hard position.
Patty, obviously you've seen a lot of this, right?
Yeah, I would say that was a huge turning point in my veterinary career when aftercare finally became mainstream. And so when I started out, it was little old ladies holding bake sales for like one horse to get its leg fixed, So that has changed so much now, and it has given us a lot of options. And we've been very active in my practice about campaigning against the one last race syndrome. And so we work with about 7 or 8 mid-Atlantic adoption agencies in our area, and we work exclusively really with New York. And so when there's a horse that gets a condylar fracture or has some kind of issue that is actually able to be fixed, and if it's fixed, it can do something else, we give an avenue now to those trainers and owners to get out. So the horse gets taken care of. We do whatever it needs, we provide pro bono, and then it's farmed out to whatever adoption agency. That has really been a game changer for horses that kind of were at the bottom and not getting the right care and ending up in this game of chicken, musical chairs, where whoever ended up with it didn't have the money really to fix whatever it needed. So that has changed in the last 10 years dramatically. And those programs are well in place now and has really helped change that scenario quite a bit. So we are seeing less and less of those end bottom claiming horses that are just run one too many times. We've kind of put that education factor in now that there's a way for them to get out, that they're not going to be economically viable if they just keep trying to race them. So they're going to lose money anyway. But if they get out now, the horse can have whatever attention it needs and go on, and everybody's happy. So that's been a huge cross off my bucket list really for life. So that has been a tremendous improvement in all of racing.
I was just going to add this to that thought. This is one area that practicing veterinarians and regulatory veterinarians, in my view, have worked very, very well together, because every time that I've had an incident where I thought that there was not proper care being delivered, whether it's being fed, watered, or stalls bedded properly, or certainly in an injury not properly taken care of, I've spoke to our regulatory veterinarians anywhere I've ever been, and always found that was attended to almost immediately. And I appreciate that part of it, because I get really offended when somebody mistreats one of these horses, because let's be honest, this is an entertainment industry and they're giving their all for our entertainment, whether it's gambling or you just like the sheer competitiveness of it. They're there for our pleasure, and we're not doing our part if somebody does not take care of that animal, and then we don't say anything about it. It's just wrong on every level. So I found that when I speak up, but I will say this about many, many people on the racetrack, if they sense that a horse isn't being properly cared for, they'll usually bring it to my attention or a regulatory person's attention also. They resent it. They don't like it. It reflects poorly on them. And I'm talking about hot walkers, grooms, other trainers. Everybody will usually raise a stink about it to the point where somebody is proactive quickly. Many veterinarians have done a lot of pro bono work to get that horse out of a crisis and to where they can get to the off-track situation. I've done it. We've all dedicated a lot of our time, certainly a lot of drugs and other materials and whatnot, x-rays, just to see I've x-rayed so many horses in my career because people wanted to give them away, if you will, but they needed some information first. And I don't know how many hundreds of sets of x-rays I've taken trying to help that particular horse. And so I'm willing to do it. My colleagues, for the most part, are willing to do it. And if it's a matter of antibiotics for an infection or a puncture wound or whatever it is, I'm proud to say that most racetrack people rally together to kind of root that kind of crap out. And I'm sorry to say it that way, but that really makes me mad. And I'm glad that most of my racetrack folks feel the same way. But anyway, that's all I have to say about that.
I think the biggest challenge, and it's what Patty was talking about, is that one last race syndrome. Is it's not even the horse that is broken down in the stall or injured or starving. It is trying to figure out how to get that horse that probably isn't performing well. He's starting to get sore. We're really limiting his options or even risking his options for a second career, because I own 4 off-track thoroughbreds and ride them as often as I can with my job. And I think that, having ridden them and evented at very low levels, they are amazing athletes. They will give you their all. They try hard. They are game. They like having something to do and a job. And I think if we can get them to that point before they are at, dealing with significant limitations, it is a great thing. It's just figuring out how to identify those horses And we have at Stronach Group at all of our tracks, we have an aftercare coordinator who goes around and talks to people. We tend to identify these horses that are, if they're maybe finishing 30 lengths out, they used to be winning. Now they're dropping in class and finishing out way out of the race. And, that's the opportunity to at least start having that discussion. But identifying as many of those horses as possible is so challenging and really important, though.
I was going to say, how overwhelming is it to just think about the amount of horses that fit that mold, Dionne?
I mean, I think it's getting better. I think we're getting less and less of those horses overall. I think people are making those decisions earlier in some cases, but I also think that the care that's being given by the private veterinarians is really improving by a ton. We've got, at least in a couple of states, Kentucky, California, the vets are looking at these horses on a regular basis because they have to look at them before they work and they have to look at them before they race. And I think that allows veterinarians to really manage the care for race horses, which allows them to, I think, head off a lot of the issues that are going to go too far, like the synovitis that then becomes more problematic, or the small chip that's giving them a little effusion that becomes a fracture eventually. So, I mean, I think that just the interactions and putting the practicing vet back in charge of the healthcare for the horses is so helpful. And I think that really allows a lot of horses to race further into their age.
I totally agree with those two things there. One is that the referring veterinarian, the track practitioner, their armamentarium, or whatever you would call it, their doctor's bag has increased so much in quality that they could take a digital radiograph at the track, photograph it, send it to you in a text, talk to a surgeon or talk to someone who has some familiarity with that problem, and get the right advice right away. So they have very, very good diagnostic skills at the track. And secondly, I get asked now more than ever by owners and trainers that they've made the economic calculation and said, I'm spending $40,000, $50,000 a year training this horse. It's really not performing well. Let's move it on and let's take this option that we now have. So that there's so many more open doors for these horses that weren't there before, and it has made it a lot easier. You're really not getting a lot of those lower level, cheap, lame horses than you were before, because no one can afford to train them around here. I mean, it's just not economically viable. So I think it's dramatically improved for those two reasons.
And what do we think would help on a day-to-day basis, just going back for a second to the veterinarians themselves, the professionals themselves, what do we think would help day-to-day? Because what I'm hearing, obviously, clearly, from the horse side, definitely the network works. When you've got vets, whether they're kind of, as Bill was saying, they kind of oversee each other, or they're kind of looking out for each other, and they're saying, hey, maybe you're towing the line a little bit here. We have the regulatory side of it saying overlooking. And again, it seems like that's working. But when it comes to actual veterinarians, and also especially the younger generation of veterinarians now that are coming in, the 20s, 30 somethings that are coming in that might be struggling early on, how do any of you think there either something exists or something could be implemented that could help those veterinarians make that transition from coming out of school and then getting into a healthy, burgeoning practice, like all of you, of course, have done and now have gone on to successful careers?
Well, an internship or mentorship is vital. There's so much lay of the land that you don't get in school. So really mentoring and interning with someone else, at least for a year, I think is a tremendous asset.
Well, it does seem like there's just an issue, a shortage, right? Industry-wide. But if we're talking about the shortage at the top level, and we all know this, Santa Anita, Gulfstream Park, Churchill Downs, these are A-level tracks. What's happening at the lower tracks? If there are shortages at the top, what's happening at the bottom?
Yeah. Well, I mean, even on both sides, regulatory and private.
I'd like to speak to that a little bit because my experiences in racetrack veterinary medicine has spanned going from places like Kansas City to Hoosier Park to Canterbury, a place where I really loved, but couldn't stay there very long. And all places, kind of in between. And what I see is obviously the best horsemen are at the best racetracks. But at the lower ends, I'm getting in an area that I'm going to be a little careful here. But I don't think a whole lot of trainers at the lower ends have done enough, had enough mentoring, had enough. Well, let me just say this. I see a lot of grooms and hot walkers, all of a sudden they become owners and trainers within a short period of time. And I don't think commissions are making them have enough background and enough training with the right people in order to be out there training a horse, particularly, if it's their own. You see it happen all the time. And those people, a lot of those people have the one more race syndrome. A horse was given to them because the owner was tired of that horse. So this groom picks up this horse and 3 or 4 guys own it. And they're going to squeeze, Doc, we want you to inject everything on him so we can get him over there and see if we can make a few dollars. Hey, I'm not your guy. I'm not doing that. That's not me. And what you really need to do is move the horse on to a retirement situation. So I see a lot of situations where people shouldn't either be owning or training horses because they don't have an apprenticeship, they don't have the right kind of training, mentoring, all sorts of things that I think would make them smarter about what they're doing with that horse. They're oftentimes the same people that were having issues with animal husbandry. In other words, taking care of those animals, feeding properly, taking care of injuries, wounds, etc. And I saw a lot of it at places where the purses weren't very big. And I would say that, at the A-level racetracks, you're going to have some, but you're not going to see it much. But when you go to some other tracks, you're going to see it as a much more prevalent situation. That's kind of the reality of it. I think what Dionne was trying to say a minute ago about rehoming these horses is we want to rehome these horses while they can still do another discipline. Maybe they can be dressage. Maybe they can be jumpers. Maybe they could just be a horse that somebody could ride in the backyard for somebody, but not just a lawn ornament. We don't want these horses to be in so much pain they limp from the middle of the pasture back to the feed tub at night, and their existence is not good. We want these animals to have another job in life. Animals like to work. They like to please humans. Particularly horses and dogs and horses love to please humans. And so that last race mentality that she spoke of and Patty spoke of, I think a lot of that is if we can kind of get rid of some of these people owning horses that are not prepared to own them yet because maybe they haven't been educated enough, or certainly they don't have the financial resources to properly take care of that horse. I know this is the United States and we have a free enterprise system, but we've got to protect these horses from some folks that don't understand what good animal husbandry is and what their level of greed might be. I mean, I see it. I've seen it. I don't like it. Just don't like it at all.
What I hear from all of you is really an intense passion and love for horses. Like it comes out, it just radiates from all of you. And I guess that's what you were saying in the beginning, that this is why you chose this profession. And most people, when they get into veterinary medicine, they choose this profession because it really is something that they feel intensely. And it seems like some of the things would almost like break your heart when you see it and you see something going wrong, or you're watching something play out in real time. Maybe you have no control over, it breaks your heart. And also you see some people go off on the wrong path, let's say, when maybe they started off with good intentions, but somehow at some point, at some juncture, they just, whereas you were saying that, oh, I just, I'm not going to, Bill, you were saying that, there's some instances where I'm just not going to treat that. I'm not going to do that. And some people at some point, when they get to that juncture, they don't say that. They don't say, I'm not going to do that. And they go ahead and they go off into another direction. But what do all of you think? Like, again, that intensity, where it can be really intense. Obviously, it's a love for the horse, but it also could be heartbreaking for some of the things you're seeing. How do you deal with that daily, that up and down, that emotion? Because you obviously love horses, all of you.
Yeah,
So,
and you are all human beings who love animals. I mean, at the end of the day, a simple question: how does it make you feel?
I mean, the bad things make you feel horrible, just like anyone. But I mean, I think for me, I can't look at the day to day, because I'm going to have really bad days and I'm going to have hopefully a lot of really great days. I look at where we're headed. Are we improving the industry? Are we making things better? Are we seeing fatalities drop? Are we seeing horses racing healthy longer? If I feel like we're still moving, that's what keeps me going personally, is that there are still things we can do to help. I think if it were just the day in, day out of maybe accepting the way it was done 20 years ago, I wouldn't be able to do this. But because we can change, I think, and we have changed, I think that's where my satisfaction comes in.
For me, it's very personal days. Like I'm like a high-end auto repair shop for sports cars, but these sports cars are animals that have personalities and they react to you. So when I have a particularly hard case, if I lose that case, it's really tough. I still think of horses that I, had worked on that I had to euthanize 20 years ago. So they're all individuals, and that's the hard part for me, is that they're real live animals, and you get to know them and they get to know you, and you can sense when one's trusting you or how they feel about you, or they're apprehensive, whatever it is, and you try to win them over. So I take every day as every day, but I have some days that are really tough, or I can't sleep because I'm worried about a horse, or I come over at 3:00 in the morning because I just want to make sure it's okay. So it's still very, very personal for me, because I have very individual relationships with these horses. So I don't know what it'll do to me when I'm 70 or 80, but for now, it's an incredible career, but it does have some real highs, but some real lows.
well, I think this is probably a great place to end it. But I think we'll just conclude by saying, I think it's conversations like this that really are going to get people talking and really get people maybe things to continue to change and to progress. But I want to thank all three of you for coming on. I know I appreciate it. Gabby, of course, appreciates it too. But really, we've just enjoyed having you guys on.
Thanks very much. Well, we just got finished recording another episode of Let's Talk, presented by First Racing, and this was really interesting, Christina. I'm curious to get your perspective on it, but for me, it was, you can definitely tell that these vets absolutely love horses, love animals, and at the end of the day, they're trying to do what's best for the horse. It's
such a labor-intensive profession, in terms of not only when you're going through school, when you get out of school, out of vet school, when you go into practice, you work these long hours, you work these crazy hours. And I, having worked at a veterinary hospital, small animal practice years ago, you also see it's an environment where there's a level of, you've got to be objective and you've got to do the task at hand. And sometimes it's pretty intense, but at the same time, there's definitely an emotional aspect because you love the animal, and you see that with them because they're professionals. They do their job. They do a fantastic job, obviously, because they're very successful in this profession. But they also have that emotion, that pull towards these animals. So I think really to be a vet, it's almost the thing where, Gabby, you and I, we've discussed this. It could be a challenging profession for many people in terms of the emotional, the stress, the pressures. We've even discussed there's a level of just depression that comes with this profession. So I think that they really showed the best of the trade, and there are a lot of people out there like them. They're not the only ones, and the ones, unfortunately, that garner the headlines, unfortunately, they're the very small percentage, but those are the ones that get on the headlines.
Yeah, you get the feeling that they, from a practicing standpoint and a regulatory standpoint, even a surgical standpoint, as Dr. Patty was mentioning, there are huge obstacles that each have to overcome within the industry. I think we can all agree that we've come a long way in the last 5 years, especially, but I think we still have a long way to go. And I still think it's fascinating to me that all the different states, all the different jurisdictions, all of the different rules and regulations, and the practicing vet has to know all of this. Not even if you're treating a horse, say in Kentucky, and you know the rules and regulations there, you need to, if that horse is shipping to New York, or if that horse is shipping to Maryland or Delaware, you need to know all of those rules and regulations. And it just seems really overwhelming. And that kind of trickles on to, I think, the reason why we're not getting new young vets in the sport too, because there's so much pressure to maintain these positions. So I just thought it was a really fascinating conversation. I definitely learned a lot. I'm sure you did too.
Community. If you saw that's really what came across from all of them, is that community, that sense of community. And look, even if they don't always agree with each other on every issue, it happens. We see it every day, but they do a lot. They really fundamentally at the bottom line is they love horses. They love what they do. They love their profession. They love the industry. And that's what propels them forward. So this was really, really a great conversation. And I hope we have more of them to really propel this industry.
Me too.